In this country, Jeffrey Smith has raised the public awareness about this life-threatening issue to the point that now we all believe that we are within reach of abolishing the fraud in our country completely. Please join me in welcoming Jeffrey in this essential talk. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Yes, okay. I was just at the South Florida Fair. They had chocolate-covered bacon on a stick. They had deep-fried Oreos and Snickers and Twinkies. They had FSOs, food-shaped objects. It was quite a contrast to come to this feast. But I'll tell you, I got here you know, just before I'm supposed to come on. And have you ever tried to chew sprouts quickly? It's a real workout. How many people are foodies? How many people don't want to admit that they're foodies? So how many people graduated from Hippocrates today? Give yourselves a hand. All right, how many people are concerned about eating GMOs? How many people have no concern whatsoever? I'm looking around for the Monsanto guy. You know, the Monsanto guy goes. How vigilant are you? That's a good question. How vigilant are you at avoiding GMOs? So think about it. If 1 is what's a GMO, and 100 is no GMOs, I want you to rate yourself from 1 to 100. And that includes going out to eat. Includes the South Florida Fair. It includes going out to your friend's house, as well as buying food. So let's just get a sense of where we are in this group. How many would be in the 1 to 20 lower vigilant range? Raise your hand. Specifically on GMOs only. Okay, specifically on GMOs. 20 to 40. 40 to 60. 60 to 80. 80 to 100. Interesting how it's spread evenly among all. Anyone hate raising their hand? We got one there. Okay, so now how active have you been at talking about GMOs to others? Again, 1 to 100. How many people are the lower level of talking about GMOs? 1 to 20? 20 to 40? 40 to 60? 60 to 80? 80 to 100? I know the 80 to 100s, you know? It's like your friends go, there he is, run! So I'd like to ask you now, since there was a number of people that have given up GMOs in the 60 to 100 range or thereabouts, how many of you noticed that when you got rid of GMOs from your diet, something in your health got better? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hands up, look around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, can't see back there, probably 5 more. Okay, so obviously my eyes didn't get all that much better when I got rid of GMOs. So let's hear from you to start. What were some of the symptoms that you noticed either got better or disappeared? Yeah?
Bloating.
Bloating, okay, so how many of you noticed an improvement in gastrointestinal problems whatsoever? Any of them? Okay, almost the same number. That is always the most popular topic, most popular category of things that can go wrong. When the American Academy of Environmental Medicine looked at the lab animals that were fed GMOs, they said gastrointestinal problems, among others. People are describing dramatic improvements in gastrointestinal problems, and we're going to talk about why that might be the case. What's another one? Yeah.
Communication
Communication.
Forgetfulness.
Forgetfulness.
Lack of memory.
Okay. What were we talking about? Thank you. So, anyone, forgetfulness? Okay. Brain fog. Lots of hands up for brain fog. Brain fog is in most of the talks I give as a primary symptom that people get better from. What's another one? Yeah.
Just my immune system in general.
Immune system in general. Anyone else? Immune system in general? Notice an improvement? Lots of hands. Okay, yes. What else?
Energy level.
Energy level. How about energy level? Yeah, same thing. Energy level. Okay. I had someone in the back of the room once yell out, erectile dysfunction. So I instantly went like this. Okay, raise your hand if you have erectile dysfunction. Another symptom. Yes?
Allergies.
Allergies. How many allergies? Okay. Every single audience out of about 90 at this point, everyone but one had allergies mentioned. Okay, you wanted to add something?
Emotional health.
Emotional health. Emotional health? Darn it. I mean, emotional health. So, okay. I hear that a lot. That's why I was trying to act aggressive. It didn't work. But I had one woman say her 6.5-year-old was violent and out of control. They wanted to kick him out of school. She told me later they wanted to label him retarded. And she saw my film, Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, and did what most people who do when they watch the film. They change their diet immediately. So she changed her son's diet, and she said within a month she had a new son, none of the problems persisted. And we have animals that are taken off of GMOs, and their violence stops. They become sociable again. They stop biting the tails or ears off the other pigs. They act differently in the laboratory, etc. Other symptoms? Yeah.
Stiffness.
Stiffness. Anyone else with stiffness? Okay. What else? Yes.
Insomnia.
Insomnia. We're going to talk about melatonin and GMOs. Anyone else with insomnia? I see like 5, 6, 7 hands. Back there?
She lost 250 pounds and it helped with the hormonal imbalance.
250 pounds lost and hormonal balance. Let's give an applause. How many people noticed a reduction in weight? I hear that all the time. And I hear it from people who don't expect it. That they take GMOs out of the diet because of their autistic son or because of allergies or something, and everyone in the family loses weight. Any other symptoms? Yeah?
Just skin look better.
Skin. Oh, skin is huge with the GMO. Huge. Anyone else with skin? I hear that all the time. I was never expecting it. And I have specific eczema, rashes, acne, ulcerations of the skin, all sorts of things with skin. All right? We're getting close to the end. Any others? So, you know what the main difference is between this group and the 90 other lectures that I've asked this question to? Nothing. I hear this all the time. In fact, I hear more testimonials about the dangers of GMOs and getting rid of GMOs than anyone else in the world. So I feel a pressure to share it with other people because it is amazing what's happening. Now, if you look at the animal feeding studies, you have gastrointestinal disorders. This is the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Gastrointestinal disorders, immune system problems. We heard some allergies here. Anyone asthma? Yeah, asthma? Okay. Reproductive disorders, organ damage, accelerated aging, dysfunction and regulation of cholesterol and insulin. Did anyone notice an improvement in their blood sugar level or diabetes when they switched to non-GMO? Okay, 1. I've heard people describe amazing, miraculous recoveries. So when people get rid of GMOs, they experience these type of improvements. When you get rid of GMOs, though, how do you do it? There's not labeled. You have to create a strategy. So what are the components of the strategy? Organic. So as soon as you say bioorganic, I say cofactors, confounding factors. Something else may be at play to explain these improvements, because organic has higher antioxidants, better minerals and vitamins, and it also is without the other nasties, the other sprays, etc. What are some other ways that you avoid GMOs?
If it's labeled.
If it's labeled, good.
Whole foods.
Whole foods. When you switch to whole foods, you get rid of colorings, preservatives, all sorts of things. And there's just too many. It becomes very, very difficult.
The retail chain?
No, no, whole foods meaning non-processed foods. Right, sorry. Yeah, unprocessed foods, which are sometimes available at Whole Foods. And some people, when they go to doctor's offices, like I went to a doctor's office, and I actually went to the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, and I started interviewing the doctors. Now this was in 2009, a few months after they had come out with this policy saying all doctors should prescribe non-GMO diets to all patients. So here were some doctors that were already prescribing non-GMO diets, in some cases for years. Now I had been interviewing scientists and translating the scientists for the general public for years. And so, any scientists here? Because I'm going to make fun of you. You know how scientists speak? Converging lines of evidence suggest that I might be chilly. You know, they don't actually say anything with definitiveness. Nothing is proven. There's no cause. It's just seems to, appears to, suggests. So when I spoke to the doctors, I was shocked. They didn't speak like scientists. They said GMOs cause inflammation. An allergist told me, my patients have more allergic reactions to GMOs. I had one doctor say, I prescribe non-GMO diets to everyone and everyone gets better. I was skeptical. So I kind of smiled and said, what percentage? She says, 100%. All right, 98%. So I said, how many patients? So she had to calculate how many new patients and when did she start. And then she looked up after a couple of minutes and said, 5,000. Everyone gets better. I went to her office and I interviewed a surgeon who does cosmetic surgery in a nearby hallway at this hospital. He refers people to her and they don't need the surgery anymore. Things go away on the faces, etc. And I interviewed her patients. And there was a patient there, non-GMO diet for 25 days, already lost 10 pounds, skin condition was clearing up, Crohn's disease disappeared in 3 days. Someone else, irritable bowel, sentenced with 6 pills for the rest of her life, 6 to 8 weeks, no more irritable bowel. Someone else, 3 weeks. Brain fog disappeared. Gut pain, allergies, asthma, migraines, from 9-year-olds to 60-year-olds to 70-year-olds. And as I asked them, what did you do to get rid of GMOs? I heard eliminate processed foods, switch to organic. And some were actually told, get out of gluten or get out of dairy because of a particular condition. So I couldn't deal with all those cofactors. Too many possible ways to explain the improvements. But when I went to the farmers and veterinarians that same month, also with a video camera, and I said, have you taken your livestock, your pigs or cows, off of GMOs, and what did you see? The same thing that happened to the humans happened to the livestock. But you didn't have gluten-free pigs or dairy-free cows. They weren't eating organic. They just switched from GM soy to non-GM soy, or GM corn to non-GM corn. And as the people in Dr. Lindner's office got rid of irritable bowel, the pigs got rid of diarrhea. As people cleared up from immune system problems, the pigs in Western Iowa dropped their needs for medications, including antibiotics, by 3/4, and in Denmark by 2/3. As people talked about improved gastrointestinal disorders, the pigs no longer died from ulcers or bloat. As people talked about reproductive disorders clearing up, the conception rate was higher, the litter size, that doesn't translate too well, but the litter size was higher for the livestock. So we're seeing the same thing. And now the pet owners and pet veterinarians are coming to us. There's even a pet food advertising on television as non-GMO. I went to a veterinarian in Prescott Valley, Arizona. She saw the film Genetic Roulette, realized, wow, this is it, started avoiding GMOs and telling all of her pet owner clients to take the animals off of GMOs. And many had, and she had a whole storehouse of stories. And I interviewed her and I said, okay, sometimes you do a lot of things. Sometimes you do acupuncture and herbs and supplements, and you get rid of the GMOs. What about when you just get rid of GMOs? She says sometimes the pet owners hold out and they don't want to change the diet. So they do everything else, but there's some intractable diarrhea. And we finally get them off of GMOs at the very end, goes away. Or at the pet food store, it was the opposite. The pet food store owners were describing how the pet owners would come in and say, my animal has itching, allergies, diarrhea, aggressiveness, etc. And the only thing they do is switch to non-GMO. Because they're not going to the veterinarian at that point, they're going to the pet food store. Switch to non-GMO, problem disappears. One after the other after the other. So now we have lab animals, humans, pets, livestock, and we have correlational evidence showing increases in certain diseases when GMOs were introduced. Now, what you heard already was a rather wide variety of diseases, right? I mean, from skin conditions to what we were talking about, forgetfulness, to brain fog, to erectile dysfunction, so many different things. What could possibly cause so many of those problems? If you look at the nature of the GMOs, which we'll do in a minute, they predispose us and the animals to these same type of disorders. There are two main toxins in GMOs. One in corn and cotton that produces its own insecticide that breaks open the stomach of insects to kill them. Most GMOs are engineered not to die when sprayed with herbicide, mostly Roundup. So you have Roundup Ready soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, and alfalfa, doused with Roundup, absorbed into the plant, stored into the food portion for us to eat. If you look at the nature of those two toxins, they could explain these disorders. But if you look at the nature of the genetic engineering process itself, that too could explain it, no matter what gene you put in. Because when here's how you do it. Let's say you want to create a corn plant that produces its own pesticide. So you start with soil bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis, BT, and it produces a BT toxin that breaks open the stomach of insects to kill them. You take the gene out of the bacterium, make millions of copies, put it into a gun, shoot the gun into a plate of millions of cells, clone the cell into a plant, and now every cell of that plant has a gene-sized spray bottle that produces BT toxin. But the process of insertion, whether done by gene gun or bacterial infection, plus the cloning of the cell into a plant, messes up the DNA. 2 to 4% of the DNA is different. There could be hundreds or thousands of mutations up and down the DNA. There can be up to 5% or more of the genes in the plant changing their levels of gene expression. So for example, in Monsanto's corn, 43 different proteins are upregulated or downregulated or switched on or turned off, including one that's normally silent in corn that was switched on accidentally from the process of genetic engineering to produce gamazine. You may not know what gamazine is, but you might react to it because it's an allergen. So some people might actually be reacting to, possibly dying from Monsanto's corn because of a background noise, because of a side effect due to the process of genetic engineering. In Monsanto's soy, there's a known soy allergen called trypsin inhibitor, but it's as much as 7 times higher in Monsanto's cooked GM soy compared to non-GM cooked soy. So you can have higher levels of existing toxins or allergens or carcinogens, or introduce new ones altogether. Now, this tendency to create problems was made very clear by Dr. Arpad Pusztai. How many people have heard of Dr. Arpad Pusztai? So Dr. Pusztai was the world's leading researcher in his field. He was a money magnet for the Rowett Institute in Aberdeen, Scotland, one of the top nutritional research laboratories in the world, because he was so famous. They kept him on after retirement. He was there 35 years, and he won a grant from the UK government over 27 competing applicants. And the grant was to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs. The protocols that he was going to develop were supposed to be implemented into the EU regulatory framework, so anyone that wanted to get GMOs on the market had to go through Pusztai's protocols. So he had 20 or more people working for him, 3 different institutes, and he decided to put a genetically engineered potato through the protocols of an animal feeding study that he had designed for GMOs. Now, the potato had been inserted with a gene from a snowdrop plant, and it was a lectin, a type of protein that he was the world's expert on. And this was the type of lectin, the specific protein, that he knew more about than any other. He had studied it for 7 years. And he put the gene that produced this lectin, which was an insecticide, into the potato, or someone else did, and they tested it on a group of rats with a complete and balanced diet. A second group got a natural potato, the same type exactly. A third group got a natural potato, but the diet was spiked with the same insecticide that the GM potato produced in the same amount. So you have GM, non-GM, and non-GM plus insecticide. Only this group got sick. What was the reason? It was not the insecticide. It was the process of genetic engineering. Potentially precancerous cell growth in the digestive tract, smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, and damaged immune system in 10 days. Now let me show you a picture. That is the intestinal walls of the rats fed the GM potato on the right, and the non-GM potato on the left. That's the stomach lining. Dr. Pusztai was aware that his potatoes would have passed the superficial tests done by the industry to get their crops on the market. He realized that they never tested or looked at the gut lining, the organ, potential organ damage, the immune system, the size of the organs. He told me it was actually the most shocking moment in his life to read the submissions by the biotech industry, because he was one of the top scientists in the world, and he just expected that scientists practiced science. But when his director, who was on the exclusive committee that approved GMOs for the UK, brought in a stack of 600 or 700 pages into Pusztai's office and said, a minister of agriculture is meeting in Brussels to do a vote on GMOs and needs a scientific opinion on these submissions, Pusztai had a chance to look at those submissions, because they're normally confidential. He said to the director, how much time do I have? The director said 2.5 hours. He said those 2.5 hours were the most shocking moments for him. He said, Jeffrey, I realized what I was doing and what the biotech companies were doing was diametrically opposed. I was doing safety studies. They were doing as little as possible to get their foods on the market as quickly as possible. He said their research was flimsy, poor, superficial, really bad science. He called the minister and said, I wasn't planning to give you a strong recommendation after just 2.5 hours. But there's not enough information here to allow these foods to be fed to humans or animals. The minister said, I don't know why you're telling me that. Those foods are already on the market. They got approved 2 years ago. That's when Pustai realized that the foods were being sold in the UK and no one knew. And he also realized when he discovered this around the same time that he had talked to the minister, that this could be happening inside our guts, but no one was looking.
Can you just, for the uneducated eye, tell us what the difference other than it's more elongated?
It's called proliferative cell growth. And it's a potentially precancerous condition. There are no tumors here, but it could lead to tumors and cancer. So Pustai, when he discovered the problems of the rats, was invited to speak on television. And with permission from his director, he was interviewed. It ran for 2.5 minutes. And he became a hero at the Institute. Headlines all over Europe. Everyone was excited. Here was a scientist, one of the top in his field, saying he didn't think it was fair to use the public as guinea pigs, and that he wouldn't put GMOs in his mouth. And that they had been doing some research and found some problems with the rats, but he didn't go into the details because it hadn't been published yet. So the director was very excited about the research, started taking all of the calls, had forwarded the phone from Pustai's office to his own, forwarded the fax. Pustai just figured it died down. He had no idea the director was talking to reporter after reporter, claiming that the research was world class, expecting to get lots of money at the Institute. But when he picked up one of the phone calls, it was from the UK Prime Minister's office. And the director had been groomed to become the head of the new Food Standards Agency that was about to be created by the UK Prime Minister. The next day, Dr. Pustai was fired by that director after 35 years, silenced with threats of a lawsuit. The 20-member research team was disbanded. They never implemented the protocols. Instead, the Institute, the pro-GM UK government, and the biotech industry embarked upon a campaign to destroy Pustai's reputation. 7 months and 1 heart attack later, his gag order was lifted. And this is the moment in time that I start my book, Seeds of Deception. I describe how his wife, Susan, answered the door. And she opened the door, and there were many members of the media standing in front of her. Others were running from their cars, and cars were parking along the street. She said, you know we can't talk about what happened. We would be sued. It's okay, the reporter from Channel 4 told her, waving a piece of paper. They've released your husband. He can speak. Susan took the paper, called for Arpad. He came over. He took it. He realized it was from the Rowett Institute, his former employer until 7 months earlier. In fact, just 20 minutes earlier, the director had casually announced at a press conference that the restrictions to Dr. Pustai's speaking to the press had been lifted. Before he finished his sentence, the reporters fled for the door and ended up in Pustai's house. As he was reading it, as his wife was reading it, all the reporters slipped into the house and sat in the living room waiting for him to speak. I'm going to share with you what happened when Pustai was able to speak. And it's very good news. And it's very telling. Let's not get it too low. It's very telling for what's about to happen, I believe, in the United States. But I first want to go through a little more of the problems with GMOs in a section of the talk I call, lovingly, Death, Disease, Destruction, and Despair. I want to show you what can go wrong with the GMOs, or better yet, why, how. I want to talk about these two toxins first. Now, the Bt toxin produced in corn is an allergen. It provokes allergic reactions and immune system reactions in humans and animals. So just the fact that it's in our corn might explain some of the immune system problems related to GMOs. But it also pokes little holes in the cell walls of insect stomachs to kill them. It's not supposed to have any impact on humans, but in 2012, they discovered it pokes holes in human cells. Now, if you have a toxin that pokes holes in human cells, that could explain gastrointestinal disorders. It also damages the microvilli, the fingers on the walls of the intestines that do the absorption of the food. So just that can explain the whole host of gastrointestinal disorders. But if it creates holes in the walls of our intestines, what it does with insects is it allows the content of the stomach to end up in areas of the insect that they're not supposed to be. So in humans, it's called permeable gut, permeable intestines, or leaky gut. If you have undigested food proteins coming into the blood supply, they're not supposed to be there. The immune system can attack those undigested food proteins. They interpret the proteins of food as foreign invaders. So you have food allergies and inflammation that come as a result. The immune system takes a mugshot of those foreign invaders, circulates it to all the post offices in the body, so that all the rest of the immune system knows who to attack. But in a twist of fate, through molecular mimicry, what may look like, well, when you look at the food protein of, say, gluten, it may look like the thyroid or another aspect of the body. So when the immune system becomes sensitized, it can attack the body, tissues of the body, called autoimmune disease. So leaky gut is linked to autoimmune disease. It's also linked to autism. It's also linked to cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. So the Bt toxin alone can explain a long list. Now, the Bt toxin and the Roundup are in our stomachs. If you have holes in the walls of the gut, they may get in the blood. And they found the Bt toxin and the Roundup in the blood of women who were tested in Canada. And in pregnant women, 93% of them had the Bt toxin in their blood. Now, a study on mice showed that the Bt toxin is toxic to red blood cells. So now you have possibly damaged blood supply. If it was in the blood of the pregnant parents, pregnant moms, it could be in the unborn fetuses. It was in 80% of the unborn fetus's blood. They don't have a blood-brain barrier well developed. So the toxin which pokes holes in human cells might end up in their brain, linking it to cognitive disorders. So just the Bt toxin alone can explain, potentially, immune system problems, gastrointestinal problems, organ damage, and other diseases related to leaky gut. Now, the Bt toxin should wash out of the blood very quickly. So the researchers were surprised to see 93% of the pregnant women with the Bt toxin in their blood. This was Canada, not Mexico, where they eat corn tortillas every day. So why is it that 93% had the Bt toxin if they're not eating corn every day? And most of the corn that they eat is highly processed, like high fructose corn syrup. There's no more Bt toxin in it. So the authors surmised that they got the Bt toxin from the milk and the meat of the animals that were feeding on the Bt corn. They did not look at another possible explanation, which I think is at least equally as plausible, if not more so. In a study published in Nature Biotechnology in 2004, they wanted to test an assumption. They had made the assumption that genes were destroyed during digestion because the biotech industry told them that genes were destroyed during digestion. Now, the FDA was very concerned about genes transferring to gut bacteria. because, for example, they use antibiotic-resistant marker genes in most of the GM crops that render bacteria, or whatever it is, resistant to death by antibiotics. So the people at the FDA were absolutely aghast that they were going to put this in the food supply, because the antibiotic-resistant marker gene could theoretically transfer from food into bacteria living inside us, mate with pathogenic bacteria, and end up with antibiotic-resistant super diseases. But they were told, don't worry, genes are destroyed during digestion. So they decided to test it in the UK, and they tested the Roundup Ready soybeans. Now, the backstory for Roundup Ready soybeans is Monsanto scientists found bacteria growing in a chemical waste dump near their factory, not dying in the presence of Roundup, which is a strong antibiotic and kills most bacteria. So they figured, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene out of the bacterium and put it into soybeans. So now you can spray the field of soybeans, Roundup Ready soybeans, with Roundup, and the Roundup Ready soybeans don't die. All the other plant biodiversity does, but not the Roundup Ready soybeans. So they decided to do this very brilliant experiment. They took 7 human volunteers, and they had their lower intestines removed, not for the study. This was prior to the study. And they had a colostomy bag, or an ileostomy bag. And they probably wouldn't have gotten that. There's enough experiments on us going on already. So they fed them a soy burger and a soy milkshake that was genetically engineered, looked into the ileostomy bag, and were surprised to find how much intact genetically modified DNA had survived passage through the stomach and small intestine. But in 3 of the 7 volunteers, before they were fed the meal, embedded in the DNA of their gut bacteria was the gene, or part of it, that Monsanto scientists had found in the chemical waste dump by their factory and had placed into Roundup Ready soybeans. So from some previous meal or meals, the genes jumped ship. And this was the UK. They don't eat a lot of GM soy there. So the percentage of colonization of our gut bacteria is probably higher than 3 out of 7 in North America. Now, that gut bacteria was unkillable with the Roundup active ingredient glyphosate, suggesting, but not proving, that after it transferred, it was still functioning, meaning that it was producing Roundup Ready proteins 24/7 from inside our own intestines. The Roundup Ready protein has properties of a dust mite allergen. So if you're allergic to dust, you might be allergic to Roundup Ready soybeans, and you might get continually triggered if the genes are functioning inside you. They never checked to test if the Bt toxin also transfers. If you eat a corn chip with Bt toxin genes, and those genes transfer to the DNA of our gut flora, it might turn our intestinal bacteria into living pesticide factories. And that may be why 93% of the pregnant women tested had Bt toxin in their blood, because they were producing it possibly inside their own gut bacteria. So that's just one of the 2 toxins, the tale of 2 toxins. Then we have Roundup. Roundup's active ingredient is called glyphosate. It was patented in 1964 as a broad-spectrum chelator. How many people have heard the word chelation? Now, chelation is often used as a means to clean out heavy metals, and it's a binding. The chelation is it binds molecularly with the heavy metals and ushers it out of the body. But the chelation that glyphosate does is with all of the different minerals: manganese, magnesium, iron, all of them, or all the cations. So what we have is well, the way it kills is this. It binds with all these nutrients, making them unavailable to the plants. When those nutrients, those minerals are unavailable to the plant, those are like locks and keys that allow certain metabolic pathways to take place. Without the minerals, the plant can't function in a healthy manner. And one of the ways that it can't function is to defend itself against disease. So it becomes weak and defenseless. Glyphosate also kills beneficial bacteria in the soil, and part of their job is to translate minerals so that they're easily assimilable by the plant. They fail. It also kills the beneficial gut bacteria that keep in check the soil-borne pathogens, the fungus that can kill the plant. And glyphosate promotes the fungus directly. So it is a perfect storm of a weak and sick plant and all these diseases growing in the soil which easily kill the plant. If you spray glyphosate on a plant in sterile soil, you will stunt it, but you won't kill it, because there's no soil-borne pathogens that'll do the killing. So we see that the Roundup-ready crops are also weak and sick. They don't have the nutrients. The primary food for livestock in the US is Roundup-ready crops. Soy, corn, cottonseed, canola meal, sugar beet pulp, alfalfa. So you have weak and sick plants. You have the animals eating weak and sick plants. They become universally nutrient deficient and weak and sick. We eat the weak and sick plants, maybe the weak and sick animals, and in the plants we have deposits of the glyphosate, which can then chelate with our nutrients, further making us weak and sick. So that's one way that glyphosate can lead to these diseases. And if you look at the relationship between nutrients and nutrient deficiency and diseases, you have a huge list. Now, glyphosate is also an endocrine disruptor. So the whole hormonal system and the mood related to hormonal system and the reproductive disorders can be related to Roundup. Now, Roundup also kills beneficial gut bacteria. Not the nasty stuff, not the botulism, the E. coli, the salmonella. It kills the bifidus, which is a suppressor of inflammation. It kills the lactobacillus. It kills the stuff that we're constantly trying to buy pills for. So if we have an overgrowth of negative gut bacteria, that can produce zonulin, which can then break open the gaps in the walls and the intestines, creating leaky gut. So it too creates leaky gut. And the overgrowth of negative gut bacteria can create gas, and it can irritate the walls. It can suppress digestive enzymes. It also damages the microvilli. Now, one thing that it does, we know, according to everyone, that Roundup blocks the shikimate pathway in plants. Shikimate. You don't have to spell it, it's just shikimate. And Monsanto said, no problem, humans don't have the shikimate pathway. So drink it. But gut bacteria has the shikimate pathway. And it uses the shikimate pathway to produce the aromatic amino acids, including L-tryptophan. The primary source of L-tryptophan in the body is the gut bacteria. Tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin and melatonin, the good guys. If we have problems creating serotonin, we have stress problems. We don't say, I'm full, I can stop eating now. We have problems with melatonin, we may have insomnia, all sorts of problems there. It also blocks the metabolic pathway called the P450 cytochrome pathway, which is a detox pathway. So if those CYP enzymes are not functioning properly, then every other toxin you're exposed to is amplified, because it cannot be ushered out of the body as easily. It also promotes cell growth in breast tissue, breast cancer, So it's linked to breast cancer and other types of cancers. It's linked to Parkinson's disease, endocrine disruptor, kills gut bacteria, et cetera, et cetera. Just looking at the biochemical properties of glyphosate, 2 brilliant scientists wrote an article last year linking it to heart disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes, autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, aggression, and depression. So now you can see how the 2 toxins, just those 2 toxins, along with the process of genetic engineering, could lead to so many different diseases and disorders. So for the visual learners, I'm going to share some more slides to really burn these things into your brain. We're going to go through them quickly. I'm just going, what do you think? Pretty good? So, farm workers, this is the visual, I'm just going to show you the pictures. Farm workers in India harvesting or even touching the BT cotton are getting allergic reactions and rashes. When they allow animals to graze on the cotton plants after harvest in India, thousands of sheep died, as well as buffalo. I went to one village in India. They allowed their 13 buffalo to graze on genetically engineered cotton plants for a single day. All of them were dead within 3 days. Many of those had been eating natural cotton plant after harvest for 8 years. This is a graph showing some of the root uptake in the presence of a tiny amount of glyphosate. So zinc, manganese, and iron. A tiny amount, the kind that could drift over from another field. Okay? You can see the dramatic difference in what's taken up by the root, and even more dramatic in what moves through the plant. So the plants are really weak and sick. And just a tiny amount can do a lot. In fact, one of the scientists that wrote that article about glyphosate, he only got interested in glyphosate from his own personal experience. He had an organic garden, and he was spraying coyote urine around the garden to keep the deer away. He ran out of it, so he decided to use his own urine to see if it worked. He noticed it killed weeds. His urine killed weeds. He took some plants into his greenhouse, sprayed it with urine, and it killed weeds. He was spraying Roundup on another part of his property. Just from spraying the Roundup, it was absorbing into his skin, into his blood, into his urine, and he was killing. He stopped spraying Roundup, his urine was no longer deadly. This is the liver of a rat fed GM Roundup Ready soybeans, and this is a natural liver. This is testicles that had changed from pink to blue after the rats ate genetically engineered Roundup Ready soybeans. I use this slide to take an opportunity to take a long, slow drink to let this one get to the guys in the room. Mice also had damaged young sperm cells. Female rats had damage to their uteruses and ovaries. I spoke at the European Parliament several years ago with several scientists, including Irina Ermakova, a senior researcher at the Russian Academy of Sciences. So she gave me the following few slides. So these are Russian-speaking rats. And they volunteered for a feeding experiment with genetically engineered soy. Starting 2 weeks before they got pregnant, they were fed genetically engineered soybeans, and more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks, compared to the non-GMO fed offspring where there was a 10% death rate. The babies were also smaller and could not reproduce. Now, hamsters were fed GM soy for 3 generations, and by the 3rd generation, they also had a very high infant mortality rate of 4 or 5 times. They were mostly sterile by the 3rd generation, and many had hair growing in their mouths. Now, there was a study, let's just go to this one. These are rats with massive tumors. Now, the rats that were in the experimental group had multiple massive tumors, up to 80% of the female rats, mostly breast tumors, up to 50% of the male rats. They died at 2 or 3 times the rate, and they had organ damage, liver, kidney, and pituitary. So here's the experiment that was going on. Monsanto had tested its corn for 90-day feeding trials on rats. And that's it, 90 days. Maximum 33% of the feed as Roundup Ready corn, or BT corn. And they figured if a rat can survive and look okay after 90 days, you can feed the Roundup Ready crops or whatever to humans for their whole lifetimes. So they claim that all their studies show that the rats pass with flying colors. But Dr. G.E. Seralini from France, who's a toxicologist, who reviewed the research for approval and recommendation in France and also EU-wide, was shocked to find that there were significant signs of toxicity in the rats fed for only 90 days. 50 different parameters were off for the Roundup Ready corn. So he decided to do his own feeding study and extend the 90 days to 2 years. Within the first 90 days, there were no tumors. They started the next month, the month after which Monsanto no longer looks at rats. And this was his study done for 2 years. Immediately, the efforts of the biotech industry to suppress any evidence showing harm kicked in. They are famous for attacking scientists, even on a personal level. Seralini had already sued someone for libel and won. But they attacked him, claiming he used the wrong rats. He used the same rats that Monsanto did. They claimed his control group size was too small. He used the same size as Monsanto did. He published in the same journal. The journal came under huge pressure, and they were forced or coerced to create a new position for a scientist who had worked for Monsanto. The position was the associate editor of biotechnology. As soon as he came into position, another study showing the toxicity to blood by Bt toxin disappeared and was republished elsewhere. For a year and a half, this was on the books. Last month, the magazine or the journal retracted this study. The letter from the editor said there was no fraud or error. There was just not sufficient conclusiveness. That has never, ever been criteria for retraction of a study. Criteria for retraction is published. It's well known. Hundreds of scientists protested this decision, calling it a black mark on science, and have boycotted the publishing organization. But that's an example of even the peer review process being corrupted. But the truth holds, multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. These are stomachs of pigs that were fed genetically engineered feed on the right, natural feed on the left. Now I want to show you some of the correlations. Deaths from senile dementia against the use of glyphosate in the US. Deaths from Parkinson's disease against glyphosate and corn and soy in the US. New cases of diabetes. This is the trend line before the introduction of glyphosate. If you take the trend line out, it looks like this. This is hospital admissions for acute kidney injury. We saw the kidney problems in the rats in the previous study. That previous study tested Monsanto's Roundup Ready corn that had been sprayed with Roundup. But they also tested rats that had been fed the Roundup Ready corn that had not been sprayed with Roundup. And the rats that had been fed Roundup at low levels, well below that considered safe in the drinking supply, without feeding them the corn. All 3 experimental groups had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. This is end-stage kidney disease, kidney and pelvic cancer, thyroid cancer, liver and bile duct cancer. These are the cancers on the rise in the US, which happen to be the target tissues for glyphosate, including 3 that we've already seen: liver, kidneys, and thyroid. This is hepatitis C, high blood pressure, autism, low birth weight babies, inflammatory bowel, chronic constipation, deaths due to intestinal infection, peritonitis, obesity, rheumatoid arthritis. And in a children's hospital in Canada, near canola fields, the incidence of celiac disease went up with the introduction of Roundup Ready canola. How vigilant you'll be next week at avoiding GMOs. How many people plan to be low vigilance? 1 to 20. Raise your hand. 20 to 40. 40 to 60. 60 to 80. 80 to 100. How active do you plan to be talking about GMOs? Low active, 1 to 20, raise your hand. 20 to 40. 40 to 60. 60 to 80. 80 to 100. So the people watching the video can't tell what I just saw. The 80 to 100s have it. Clearly, a change occurred in the room, big time, just by speaking the truth. So now I can explain to you how we can get rid of GMOs and why I am so confident that the process has already started. But I want to go back to Dr. Arpad Pusztai. I told you that when we last left Dr. Pusztai, 30 reporters were sitting in his living room, and he could finally speak about what happened. Now, 3 weeks before that moment, on February 16th, 1999, there was a biotech conference in San Francisco where Monsanto's consultant, Arthur Anderson, they were also Enron's consultant, described how they had worked with the executives by first asking them, what's your ideal future in 15 to 20 years? The Monsanto executives described a world in which 100% of all commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented. And Anderson worked backwards from that goal to create the strategy and tactics to achieve it. They were planning to replace nature, to eliminate the products of the billions of years of evolution, and replace it with designer genes, designer organisms, designed for greater profit and control. It has actually expanded beyond that vision, because now they want to introduce genetically engineered livestock, fish, trees, insects. There is a plan to release genetically modified mosquitoes in the Keys to fight dengue fever, which hasn't been there for 4 years. Small outbreak, and the one before that was in 1937. It's a disaster. We can talk more about that in a little bit. So we saw a plan to replace nature in the morning session in late January of 1999, only to be outdone by a paper that was circulated that afternoon by another biotech company that projected a 95% replacement of all commercial seeds within 5 years by 2004. Then the Pusztai gag order was lifted. And then European press exploded. More than 700 articles were written about GMOs that month in the UK alone. Headlines were bouncing off the European press. Within 10 weeks, the tipping point of consumer rejection was achieved. And Unilever, then Nestle's, then virtually every other food company, committed to stop using GM ingredients in Europe. because that's where the reporting occurred. In the US, it was described as one of the 10 most underreported events of the year by Project Censored. So the same companies that had removed GMOs from Europe for more than 14 years have continued to sell GMOs to unsuspecting US consumers. Bovine growth hormone, Monsanto's drug, injected into cows to increase milk supply. I was told by a former Monsanto scientist that 3 of his colleagues did the safety studies on the milk from the cows injected, found so much of a cancer-promoting hormone, IGF-1, in the milk that 3 Monsanto scientists stopped drinking milk unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. We educated parents about the fact that the milk had more IGF-1 as well as more pus, antibiotics, and bovine growth hormone. It was kicked out of Walmart, Starbucks, Yoplait, Dannon, most American dairies, a tipping point. We educated health-conscious shoppers about the dangers of GMOs, the health-conscious shoppers who buy in Whole Foods, in the natural products section of different stores, in the mom-and-pop stores. Whole Foods president said last year in March, when a product becomes non-GMO project verified, it increases sales by 15 to 30%. Everyone in the industry heard that. There's more than 8,000 products in the pipeline from the natural products industry waiting to be verified. Non-GMO labeled products were the fastest growing category of labeled products in 2012. We saw so many key players now. Target, home brand, becoming genetically non-GMO this year. Ben & Jerry's, Chipotle's. Last month or earlier this month, Cheerios. Original Cheerios. Right. And then there's a variety now of grape nuts that's non-GMO project verified. Now, that may appear to be just another release. But the fact is, when grape nuts declared itself non-GMO project verified, I consider it to be the most important opportunity in the history of anti-GMO activism in the United States. It hangs out there as a test. Unlike Cheerios, which did not become verified by a third party, it puts the non-GMO label on the side. It did it to stave off a social media campaign that had posted 40,000 comments on its Facebook page, but posted it to promote sales. And they use the non-GMO project seal, which is what drives the health-conscious shopper. So now, if we see an increase in sales in the grape nuts and a decrease in market share of the competitors, the entire food industry looks on and realizes, I cannot afford to be the second in my product category to declare non-GMO, because market share is everything. And that's the tipping point. So we are in the window. Now, if you think about it, it's bizarre that we have a technology that can affect negatively everyone who eats, which is most people. And because it's released outdoors, it can change the gene pool in a self-replicating manner, unrecallable. The genes already released can outlast the effects of global warming and nuclear waste. The only thing that lasts longer than genetic pollution is extinction. So we have a technology that may have a bigger negative footprint than anything we have seen in history. And its fate may rest on sales of grape nuts. That is bizarre, but true. So our Institute for Responsible Technology is now gearing up an education program not focused on the Whole Food shopper, but on the Walmart shopper. Now, we don't need to convince the junk food eating couch potato who hasn't yet figured out that food relates to health to stop eating GMOs. He'll never know he's eating GMOs. He'll never know we got rid of it for him. We need to go to the more receptive demographic groups. Moms, You give information to a tiger mom, you get out of the way. Moms are a key demographic. Healthcare professionals. We have been teaching healthcare professionals since 2006 or earlier. There are now thousands of doctors prescribing non-GMO diets. Thousands upon thousands, as well as nutritionists and dietitians, etc. What about the sick people who have those diseases? We just released our first major paper at glutenandgmos.com showing how consumption of GMOs may aid in sensitivity to gluten. And we're going to do that with all of these different diseases. Then you have the pet owners who've come to us to describe the problems with their pets, and the horse owners. And then you have the religious groups that think GMO means God move over. These are the targeted groups, any one of which is large enough to command a tipping point in the United States. So our institute has designed a master plan, has helped engineer the tipping point already, is largely responsible in large part with others for the tipping point in the natural food space, and we are engineering the tipping point led by grape nuts. So we would like to ask your help, and here's how you can help. 1, if you want to join with others in your area, we have something called the Tipping Point Network. More than 10,000 people are signed up with more than 100 groups. You can sign up online at responsibletechnology.org, and it even asks you which particular demographic group you want to approach. We have a free newsletter. Please sign up for that at the table back in the back, and we will send you the newsletter and be a click and send revolutionary. Post things, share things. For those that like to speak, I've taught more than 1,000 people GMO speaker training. We'll have another one online very soon. And we have a speakers bureau to help place people who are ready to give talks in public. We have opportunities to do volunteer work at the Institute, volunteer staff, and we also need contributions to our nonprofit. We need actually a lot of money, because we realized that the currency of the internet right now are short films. Films turn out to be very important. The most powerful tool, by the way, for convincing others to stop eating GMOs is the film Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives. We've tested it. We know that it works. There's some still for sale. There's a few still left at the table. And if you are trying to get a loved one, a family member to stop eating GMOs, don't even bother. Just let us do it. Show them the film. It turns, and then keep it circulating. So we would like to invite you to help make this tipping point a reality. Because if nothing happens with market share, nothing may happen. The food industry may feel like this is a firewalled issue around the whole food shopper, and they don't have to worry about it. This is a window in time that has never come before and may never come afterwards. Now, if you think about it, and I have, it's actually an amazing opportunity. In fact, who of our ancestors had the ability to protect everyone who eats and all living beings and all future generations? No one, because there wasn't a technology that could have that negative impact until now. Consider this a resume builder. Saved all living beings and all future generations. 2014. So this is an amazing opportunity, and also it's already lively in collective consciousness. According to the Hartman Group, in 2007, 16% of Americans said they were avoiding GMOs. It went up 56% to 25% in 2010. It went 56% up in 2013 to 39%. How many people have seen more talk on GMOs on Facebook and in email traffic and in the news? It's all over. So this is the lively time. 15 years ago, and I've been working on this for 18 years, it was difficult to get people enrolled into the subject. Now it's like, yeah, I've heard about it, tell me about it. And a lot of people are ready to hear from you. So whether it's contributing with your dollars, your time, your clicks, your voice, we would love to have you join us. And I think you will find when you do, as many of those in the room already who've been doing this work, when we are supporting and celebrating nature, nature supports and celebrates us. Thank you very much. I will talk about the mosquito, but I also will take some other questions as well. Over here.
So my question is, since the FDA is not labeling GMO, how do we know that when we buy organic and there's a USDA organic label on the product, how do we know that it's been grown organically but the seed was not genetically modified?
Did anyone not hear the question? I'll repeat it. Can we trust organic as being non-GMO?
Right.
Short version. The seed itself. Organics are not allowed to intentionally use GMO inputs, including seeds. Sometimes the seeds are contaminated. Organics do not require testing to see if contamination has occurred, either at the seed level or the crop level or the production level. So you may end up with tiny amounts of contamination in organic. You may end up with tiny amounts of contamination in non-GMO Project Verified. It's the nature of nature. Even the non-GMO Project Verified, which does require testing, it has a tolerance threshold of 0.9%. So you may end up with GM corn in your corn chips, GM soy in your tofu, even if it says non-GMO or organic. Some people choose zero tolerance and don't have any soy or any corn. Others will buy organic or buy products that say non-GMO. That's what we recommend in our shopping guide. So there are soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, which is most sugar, is sugar beets, alfalfa, papaya from Hawaii or China, zucchini, and yellow squash. No popcorn is GMO, and it doesn't even cross-pollinate. The name of the shopping guide is nongmoshoppingguide.com. You can see the 10,000 products that are verified as non-GMO. And you can download it to your iPhone for free. Shop No GMO. Shop No GMO. Yes?
Okay. From what you can see, I'm just a little bit gimpy, so this question's going to be pertinent to that. First of all, I was diagnosed with MS some years ago, but I believe that I personally exacerbated it by the fact that I let my muscles atrophy by not using them. I'm wondering if you see, now I know I saw it in the slideshow, but if you can see a possible correlation between this and GMOs.
Thank you. So in the paper, in the journal Entropy, by Anthony Samsel and Stephanie Seneff, they link glyphosate with a number of things, including MS. Okay? Now, it is an extremely difficult paper to understand.
And I'm sure.
I wouldn't recommend it unless you're a biochemist. So you can go on YouTube and search for Jeffrey Smith, Stephanie Seneff, and you'll see an 1 and 5 minute long interview with about 75,000 views where she speaks, then I interpret. Then she speaks and I interpret. And it's very popular. It was picked up by Mercola. People like it a lot. And we, Seneff, S-C-N-E-F-F. So that, I believe we talk about MS in there as one of them. If not, then there's a section in the paper. Now, I have heard, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a doctor. So I hit a cliff. I have a certain amount of knowledge and then it's like, no knowledge. I can't answer that. So that's the best I can do for the moment.
I'm not looking for sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yes?
Whole Foods is planning to label their products GM, non-GMO. But what's interesting is when you go to Whole Foods and you look at their soups and their prepared foods, and everything's got canola oil in it. So have you talked to John Mackey about that?
I talked to Walter Robb, who's the co-CEO. So Whole Foods has entered all of their home brands, the 365 and the Whole Food brands, into the non-GMO project. Not everything has been verified yet. If it's entered, it doesn't really tell you anything. It has to be verified to tell you that it's meeting those standards. They've also committed that anything in the store that's not labeled organic or non-GMO project verified will be labeled as may contain GMOs or contains GMOs by 2018. So it's a long way away, but people are already scrambling to get that, secure their supply chain, etc. Their prepared foods are now in the process, slowly, painfully, of removing GMOs, but they also have vendors that use soybean oil and whatnot. Whenever I go to Whole Foods, I ask them, until very recently, I asked them to show me the canola can, and so I could see whether it's GMO or non-GMO. And sometimes they bring out the 5-gallon can, sometimes I take a picture of it. And starting about 3 years ago, I no longer saw any GM canola. It was always non-GM canola. So that turns out to be a win, that their canola, even though canola is genetically engineered, it's not always. It can be organic and it can be non-GMO. It cross-pollinates like crazy, so there's probably some small percentage that come from GMOs. So that's the answer to that. They do use non-GMO canola. I'm not sure if it's 100% consistently, but I haven't found any in the last 3 years that's GMO. Okay, in the back there.
Jeffrey, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm so thrilled. I've been following you for a couple of years and reviewing everything that you say because it's a lot. But what really, the question I'd like to ask is the BT corn and the glyphosate, once it gets in our gut and we start making our own pesticides in our gut, when we stop eating genetically modified foods, does that go away? Or how can we get rid of that?
Well, first of all, we have no data whatsoever to verify that we are getting colonized by Monsanto's genes. It was one study, and it was part of the gene, and there was a suggestion that it was still functioning. However, from a physiological and biochemical point of view, the normal plant genes that we eat don't transfer to gut bacteria, and if they did, they would not be functioning. There are certain barriers in place. Those barriers have largely been dismantled with GMOs that use genes from bacteria, and they use a different promoter, etc. There's some specific details, and so it is possible that we are regularly colonizing our gut bacteria. And I don't know personally a protocol to fix it, but I can tell you that people are getting better from avoiding GMOs sometimes within 2 days, within a day. I mean, depending on the condition. In fact, some doctors will tell you a certain number of days for certain conditions based on their prescribing non-GMO diets thousands of times. And we even see animals getting better when they go from GM diets to non-GM diets in the laboratory. They see a reversal of the damage in the pancreas, liver, and testicles in mice. So that's the good news. Someone over here, yes?
What about clothing?
Clothing.
You mentioned cotton.
So yeah, cotton, we found that the cotton produces, the BT cotton produces the toxin, and people just picking up the cotton bales, leaning against it, cleaning it, they're getting these allergic reactions in India. But the cellulose that's completely clean, it shouldn't be producing the BT cotton. So the theory is, and I haven't seen any data, the theory is that the cotton, once cleaned, is clean. If it weren't, it could be very dangerous because you have the cotton products for feminine hygiene, you have the bandages, you have clothing, you have diapers. It could really be a disaster. I'd like to see the data, but I have not heard of anyone reacting to cotton, and most of the cotton in this country is genetically engineered. Most of the cotton in India is genetically engineered. So people are wearing the BT cotton-produced cotton. Yes?
I'm very interested in twofold. The judicial and the legislative branches of our government
Judicial and legislative branches.
I'm concerned about how many lawsuits are there in the works, number one. And number two, what is the, from what you observe, what is the attitude of our elected representatives regarding this situation?
Okay, I left out a piece that I'd never leave out. FDA. See, I've got these two great characters in my work. Monsanto, who gets voted every year as the most evil company on earth, with stiff competition. In their quieter moments, their executives ask themselves, what would Darth Vader do? And then I have the FDA, the enforcement wing for Monsanto, where they were told by the White House in 1991 or so to promote biotechnology. So they brought in Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney, to be in charge of policy at the agency at the time that the GMO policy was being produced. The policy claimed, falsely, that the agency wasn't aware of any information showing that GMOs were significantly different. On the basis of that lie, no testing was necessary. No labeling was necessary. So Monsanto, who told us that Agent Orange, PCBs, and DDT were safe, can determine on their own if their GMOs are safe without even telling the FDA that they're introducing one, or consumers. It turns out that documents made public from a lawsuit 7 years later show that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the FDA was exactly the opposite as that presented in the policy, that GMOs were different, dangerous, and needed to be tested. Michael Taylor then became Monsanto's chief lobbyist and vice president, and Obama put him back at the FDA as the US food czar. He put the biotech governor of the year, Tom Vilsack from Iowa, my state, as Secretary of Agriculture. He put a guy from the pro-biotech Gates Foundation in charge of, I think his was US Agency for International Development. He put a biotech lobbyist organization vice president in charge of trade negotiations for agriculture for the world. It goes on. The State Department, according to WikiLeaks, is bullying countries around the world on behalf of Monsanto. The ambassador to France wrote a letter, a cable to Washington, or an email saying we should drop a retaliation list against the governments in Europe that are opposing GMOs and, quote, cause some pain. It goes on. So the federal government is the strength of the biotech industry. State governments are mixed. So Connecticut and Maine have passed a labeling bill that will require at least 2 other states to pass similar bills before it's enacted. Counties are banning the planting of GMOs in some cases, so lower levels of jurisdiction have more independence. Lawsuits have been filed, but it turns out the courts are not all that objective and independent in every case. The Supreme Court has ruled against us a couple of times, and Clarence Thomas, who was Monsanto's attorney and now a Supreme Court judge, never recused himself. There's another judge that denied class action status to a farmer lawsuit against Monsanto, and they didn't know it until the New York Times reported that the judge had formerly been an attorney on record for Monsanto, who didn't announce it or recuse himself. So it's a nasty business. So in my strategic analysis, and ours at the Institute, we do support legislative efforts and legal efforts, but we believe that the tipping point is more stable and more reliable and more upon us. Yes?
I just read that Cory Booker is pro non-GMO, and he just got elected to Congress, and also Marianne Williamson is running in California, who is very pro.
Yeah, there's definitely Congress people. Yeah, Barbara Boxer, Feingold, these people have supported labeling legislation. Yeah, so it's going to happen, but it may be led by the consumer revolt or go in parallel with it. So let me tell you a little bit about the mosquitoes, because it's a Florida issue. There's a type of mosquito, Aedes aegypti, that can carry dengue fever. And a company, Oxitec, which is like the Monsanto of the insect genetic engineering, they released a genetically engineered mosquito in the Cayman Islands without telling the population, and didn't really announce it until a year later, angering the scientific community and the local community, showed no improvement in dengue fever, so they released it in Malaysia and Brazil. No evidence has been published to show that it actually works, but they want to now release it in the Keys. There was so much concern by the Key West population, they said, okay, we'll release it in Key Haven, a different key. They are releasing, supposedly, first they said it's all males, and they will give rise to all sterile offspring. So there's no one who will get bit, because the males don't bite, and it's just will reduce the population, so it's safe. It turns out that 3 to 15% are actually not sterile. So then the females have 100 eggs, and the males can impregnate many times. So you end up, if you release 2 to 6 million, as they plan, you'll end up with 2 to 6 million female genetically engineered mosquitoes that can bite. Because if you do the numbers, that's how it turns out. Then they said it's all males that will be released, and it turns out there'll be some males released in the initial because some of them end up as females. So what they've told us is wrong, and there's natural techniques like releasing a predatory mosquito that's indigenous to Florida that kills off the population of this dengue mosquito in large numbers, and other things, certain funguses and bacteria and repellent plants. So I'm going to be speaking at the mosquito board in Key West on Monday, and then speaking there Monday night. But there's something else. They claim that it's important for tourism in case dengue fever comes out. Now, dengue fever, they had like 3 or 4 cases in 2009 or 10, 2009 or 10, and not since 1937. So this was their theory, for tourism. But now consider this. The chances of someone getting bitten by a mosquito in the Keys after the release happens is 100%, whether it's a GM mosquito or not. The chances of someone getting sick in the Keys is 100%. The chances of the two happening at the same time is 100%. And so you're betting that someone doesn't put it together that their disease or disorder or swelling or allergic reaction came from the genetically engineered mosquito that they read about. Whether it's true or not, the rumor could destroy the tourism in the Keys and Florida, because mosquitoes end up in buses, in boats, in planes, in cars, in Disneyland, in Disney World. So you have a situation where if it isn't true that if there's no harm whatsoever by the mosquitoes, it can still destroy, it could be a catastrophic event for tourism. Now, is it possible that a genetically engineered mosquito can cause damage to you if it bites you, or if you happen to have your baby drink water that has the larva in it that's been growing? I've asked 3 scientists, and their response is unlikely. Unlikely. You take something unlikely and multiply it by millions and hope that it doesn't become a reality. But you see, it's a potential catastrophic event. And if it's potentially catastrophic, and it's a permanent change in the gene pool, there's no justification for the release. But that's not how they're seeing it. So I'll be talking to the Mosquito Control Board on Monday, and I'll let you know what they say. Yes?
What is Monsanto getting out of this?
When you control the seeds, you control the food.
I mean the mosquito.
Oh, no, Monsanto's not in the mosquito game. It's Oxitec, a UK government, a UK company.
So what are they getting out of it?
The thing is, if they can genetically engineer mosquitoes, they'll sell them to all of the countries dealing with fruit flies and olive flies and mosquitoes and malaria and dengue. They can make billions and billions of dollars. And the thing is, it's a hugely expensive program, because once you release it, you have to maintain it. Just don't ask them to clean it up. Okay, we're gonna. What time is it anyway? I think we're gonna wrap up here. We got a few more minutes. All right, in the back, you've been very patient.
What has baffled me a lot is these ballots, for example, in California a year plus ago, where there was basically just a request to label for GMO and non-GMO, which was all, nothing else, just label the foods, and it was defeated by the voters. I can't explain that by just people not knowing, because why would you not want to know if it's this way? Can you explain why that was defeated in California? I just don't know.
Yes, why was Prop 37 defeated in California and I-522 in Washington? I can tell you exactly why. 93% of the population of those states want labeling of GMOs, but 51% voted against the ballot initiative, because in California, more than $1 million a day was being spent on multiple commercials on TV and radio, mailers and newspapers, telling people blatant lies. They had people believe that if the ballot initiative got passed, all families would have to spend more than $400 extra per year, that it was bad for farmers, bad for small business, put California at a disadvantage, was written by lawyers, trial lawyers, to create shakedown lawsuits, and was filled with exemptions created by special interests, and it was poorly written. And they had all these people in white coats and smiling faces and moms saying all of these things constantly. It was an unprecedented barrage of lies, and it worked. We got 49% of the vote in both states. Oregon will have a ballot initiative this year. Probably Colorado will as well. 26 states introduced labeling bills into their legislature. There's one already in play in Florida. So by signing up for our newsletter and putting your zip code, you'll also be informed when there's an opportunity to support labeling in Florida, or if you're not from Florida, from wherever state you are, because that's the kind of mobilization that got it passed in Connecticut and Maine and can get it passed over and over again. Someone over here, yeah.
You had mentioned that there's standards that have to be approved before they can get the label. Could you share some of those standards with us?
So nongmoproject.org is the new sheriff on the block. It used to be the Wild West without a sheriff, so anyone could claim non-GMO for any reason. You can still do that, but Non-GMO Project Verified is what we require for our shopping guide and what Whole Foods will require to avoid labeling. And so the standards are right there.
And who gives that stamp? What government body?
No government body. It is a third party that's a coalition. It was originally started by retailers in the natural food industry, and now it's expanded to retailers, producers, distributors, consumer representatives, etc. I'm trying to get everyone in the room. Yes?
First of all, I learned about you and your work from Ocean and John Robbins, and just immensely grateful for what you're doing. The question I have is around, it seems to me there's like 9 foods that you're mentioning with Monsanto. Are other ones being worked on by him? I mean, is wheat?
You don't mean him, you mean them.
Them.
Yeah, right. Joe Monsanto. I don't want to meet him in an hour. All right, so everything is being worked on, everything. Their plan to genetically engineer 100% of all commercial seeds has not ended. It was just derailed in terms of its timeline. There's an apple up for consideration, a salmon up for consideration. Basically, every fruit, vegetable, nut, grain is somewhere in the pipeline, in a laboratory, maybe in a field trial, maybe in another country. So it's critical that we eliminate the market for GMOs holistically, because then if we get rid of the current GMOs, no one wants to market a new GMO. Yes?
Don't doesn't the GMO family or army or whatever you want to call it understand this is going to affect their family?
You know, it's interesting, the mindset. I've talked to some former Monsanto people, current Monsanto people, and there is a mindset that ignores all of the information that we've talked about, even among regulators. I was speaking to the Australia and New Zealand regulators last month, when I visited both countries. And I said, I want to bring you a report from what's happening in the US by the doctors. Thousands of doctors are prescribing non-GMO. They said, anecdotal. They didn't care. They didn't want to even hear it. I talked about some of these other things we talked about. They said, we don't believe it. You know, they just basically repeat the same statements that they were told to say by the biotech industry. And the biotech industry research is tobacco science. For Australia and New Zealand, for example, Monsanto submitted a high lysine corn, which for pigs. And they said, don't worry about the protein that's produced by the inserted gene, because it has a history of safe use in the food supply, because it's found in soil. And they figured, well, because we have residues of soil in our food, it must be safe. Well, someone calculated how much corn an average male American eats, and if it was this high lysine corn, how much of the protein they would be eating, and how much protein is in the soil, and how much soil they'd have to be eating each day in order to have the same amount of protein. And it was 22,000 pounds of soil per second that would have to be consumed in order to have the equivalent amount of protein that they'd have in the corn. So it was a complete, you know, this is their complete tobacco science. They overcook samples, they dilute samples, they leave information out that's really important, they explain away statistically significant evidence. It's really a disaster of science, and they're getting away with it.
The one last thing was, I understand that Monsanto also owns a lot of forests, and they're genetically modifying the feed, so they're talking eventually someday there's going to be silent forests because of the insects.
All right, so first of all, Monsanto's not the only company that genetically engineers. Arborgen is doing trees. I don't know if Monsanto's doing trees. In the food, it's Monsanto, Dow, DuPont, Bayer, Syngenta, and now BASF. Those are the only GM food crop companies out there in the game. There's others doing salmon, mosquitoes, livestock, trees, and there is a film called Silent Forest, which we sell on our website at seedsofdeception.com, which is narrated by David Suzuki. It's an excellent film. Okay, we're wrapping up here. Raise your hand if you have any more questions. I'm going to count the number of questions. Okay, there's 3 more. Well, that's it. Okay, yes.
So my youngest, she's 6, and she has anaphylactic food reactions to peanuts and eggs with no family history of food allergies. Do you believe that could be caused by allergies?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you some stories. Someone has a chicken, chickens that they eat eggs from. The mother and daughter had an anaphylactic reaction and went to the hospital after eating eggs that they've been eating all the time. So the guy, the husband, father, called the feed producer and said, was there any change? And they said, yeah, I ran out of the non-GM feed, had to get GM feed. It was that quick, like the next day, as soon as they fed that feed. Now, do I know for sure it was the cause? No, but it was pretty strong circumstantial evidence. The peanut allergies in the United States doubled in the 5 years after GM soy was introduced. GM soy in general has a cross-reactivity with peanuts. So some people can be triggered by the soy and have a peanut-type reaction. The cross-reactivity might have been enhanced by the genetic engineering process. In addition, the trypsin inhibitor is up to 7 times higher in the cooked GM soy. Trypsin is a protein-digesting enzyme. Trypsin inhibitor blocks it. So if you block the protein digestion and you block the glyphosate also blocks protein digestive enzymes. If you leave proteins in the system longer than normal, it gives a longer period of time to create an allergic reaction. If you have leaky gut, then you might end up getting the proteins into the blood supply, creating an immune response. So it's very much related to allergies. There's all sorts of things, and there's more. I can go on for 5 minutes on this. But yes, I think it could easily be GMO related, and many children find that when their parents take them off of GM food altogether, there's a change in their allergic reaction status. But in fact, one mom saw genetic roulette. Her son, I think it was carrageenan that he was allergic to, and he'd get this dark line around his mouth. and we would have to stay home from school, serious reaction. Switched him to non-GMO completely after she saw the film, and he was exposed accidentally like 2 months later. A very, very light, he has a picture of this, very light line and no real reaction, very, very light reaction. I hear this all the time. People get, someone told me last week in North Carolina, they were sensitive to gluten. They got rid of the gluten, but they kept getting stomach problems. Then they traced it to the corn and the grits. They switched to non-GM grits and had non-GM corn, and then the whole stomach issue went away. So these are the whole gastrointestinal and immune system issues may definitely be related to GMOs. Over here.
We have spoken a lot about what is happening in America, and I'm from Norway. And you've spoken a little bit about what's happening in the UK, but could you say a little bit about what is going on? Like, I'm a bit ignorant, I feel now, what is happening. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit what is happening in Europe.
Well, Norway has been pretty good about keeping GMOs out. What happened is when Pustai gag order was lifted and the tipping point happened, then food companies committed to stop using GM ingredients. There's a labeling requirement with a 0.9% threshold for accidental contamination. If you intentionally use GMOs in Europe, you have to label it. If you accidentally get contaminated by more than 0.9%, you have to label it. You don't have to label milk and meat from animals fed GMOs. And that's where they get the GMOs in Europe. And so very, very few companies in Europe use GMOs. And if they do, they label it. And there's very few companies that label GMOs. But Norway's been good. And then there's the question of planting it. There's a few countries like Spain and Portugal that plant GM corn. France banned it. Germany banned it. Austria, parts of Austria, Greece, Poland. There's a certain number of countries, and there's certain countries that are pro-GM, like the UK government and Netherlands. So it's a mixed bag there, but what's holding the line, really, in spite of a pro-GM EU Commission and a pro-GM European Food Safety Authority, is the ban by the food companies, like McDonald's. One more question over here.
The mosquitoes, now, if I understand correctly, they had some kind of bacteria or something that was involved with the sterilization process?
No, what they did is they inserted genetic material from E. coli and herpes simplex virus. The warm and fuzzy stuff. What?
Is it possible that that might be considered bioterrorism and that we could get the Homeland Security involved to...
It's a creative solution, but I don't think so. I mean, it would be great if we can just, call Monsanto a bioterrorist, but unfortunately they're running the government. So let's wrap up here. So what do we know? We know that right now we cannot expect that the government is working for our health. We cannot expect...
Someone back there really wants you to read this.
Really wants me to read this. I'm not going to read this now. It's too much to read, to announce, but I'll read it later. Okay. We have to be in charge of our own food. Now, being in charge of our own food is a very important step, but it's also an antidote to the epidemic. The epidemic which allowed GMOs in the world was a recurring thought that was, it's not my responsibility, someone else is handling it, and I'm sure they're doing a good job. This was the FDA response. Monsanto can do their research and determine on their own if their food is generally recognized as safe. When you look at Monsanto, some of their people won't even eat the GMOs. One guy at Monsanto told me he found that they damaged the rats from the corn. Instead of withdrawing the corn, they rewrote the study to hide the effects. We knew that because we had read the studies. So we can't, in other countries, I go to other countries, I've been in 37 countries, I've testified, been on TV, speaking to the members of parliament and ministers. So often they say, we don't have to worry about it because the FDA has approved it. The FDA doesn't approve GMOs. They don't approve GMOs. They have a blanket ignorance, a blanket application. They let the companies determine if it's safe. So people will think, companies will think, corporations will think someone else is responsible, and I'm sure they're doing a good job. So now that's starting to reverse at state levels, at county levels, at individual levels. So this is where I would like to suggest that you have a lot of heavy information tonight. Some of you may choose to feel sad about it, angry, fearful. Whatever your emotion, I'd like to suggest that you use that energy and flip it so that you don't feel like a victim, but feel like a victor. So you don't have to say, I'll let Monsanto and its enforcement wing, the FDA, tell me what's food. I'll decide what's food, and I'll tell my friends and family. And moreover, right now, when this is such a leveraged issue, where we could, with a group this size, have a huge impact on the eating habits of millions of people, and we don't need millions upon millions, just a slight drop in market share or a slight increase in market share, depending on the side of the GMO issue. We could have huge impact. So I would like to suggest that right now, in this moment, we take an attitude and say, it is my responsibility, and I'll do whatever I feel inside to do that has my footprint on it. You may not want to travel to 37 countries like me and work full time, but you may have a network of friends, you may have clients, you may have customers, you may have patients, you may have a blog. How many people have a Facebook page? How many people have an email address book? How many people know anyone else? We're all networked. So this is an opportunity, and you don't have to learn all these things if you don't want to be a speaker. You don't have to take all the notes. Just take the information that we have and share it. Because right now, when we give out a shopping guide, what do people say? Thank you. Can I have another? 53% of Americans say they would avoid GMOs if labeled. We have a portable labeling guide. 39% of Americans already say they're avoiding GMOs. We don't have to convince anyone who's resistant. We just give the information to those who want to know, who would be appreciative of knowing. It is one of the easiest forms of global activism whose impact will last forever. Because we don't have to change policy. We don't have to convince the legislature. We can do it from the top of the food chain, us. So this is an opportunity for us to make a huge impact. And again, we also accept donations for those who may not have the time, but may have the finances, or know someone who does. We calculated the amount of money that it takes to stop GMOs in this country and in most countries, and it's not that much. So if you would like to speak to us about that, we can talk to you about that too. So thank you. I want to thank Hippocrates, thank Anna Maria, thank Brian, thank Michael, thank the Sprouts. Thank you all.